Episode 60 of the Habs Culture Podcast. My name is Justin Schwartz, and I'm alongside Liam Baum. And we have some pretty significant news in the NHL today involving the Montreal Canadiens. So it makes for a pretty exciting, I guess we'll say, middle of the summer in the NHL. I think that Liam and I can both agree that this trade made a lot of sense for Montreal, the way that they participated. They didn't get too aggressive, but they also made the moves that made the most sense from a GM standpoint, from Kent Hughes' standpoint. And we're going to get into that right away. And like we always say, we're going to try and keep this short, a quick recap of the trade and look at all the different players in this trade. And I think we're going to start it off with the trade details. So just right off the rip, Liam, do you want to take the reins here?
Yeah, I'll go over it quickly. We'll start off from the top to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Obviously, the main piece here, Erik Karlsson. Along with him, Rem Pitlick, Dylan Hameliuk, and a 2026 third-round pick. Then going to San Jose, a 2024 first-round pick from Pittsburgh, Mikael Granlund, Mike Hoffman from Montreal, and Jan Ruda. And then going to the Montreal Canadiens, a 2025 second-round pick from Pittsburgh, Jeff Petry, Casey DeSmith, and Nathan Legare.
All right, so let's talk about the important pieces. Let's talk about the things that affect the Montreal Canadiens first. Mike Hoffman going over to the San Jose Sharks. At some point in time, he was a part of the San Jose Sharks organization, and weirdly enough, after all the things that the Karlsson and Hoffman families have been through, they get traded for each other once again. Hoffman gets traded to the San Jose Sharks at $4.5 million for one more year this coming season. And we look at a guy in Rem Pitlick who, was up and down in the lineup, went down to Laval for a little bit, was up in Montreal for a bit. I would say tried to make the most of his opportunity, but clearly wanted a new opportunity. Liam, what are your thoughts on these two players? How are they going to affect their new organizations, and what do they bring to the table?
Yeah, like you said, Rem Pitlick was looking for a new opportunity. I think he expressed that to the Montreal Canadiens organization. So I'm happy to see a guy like him getting a new chance. He always played in the bottom six for us, other than that season where we dealt with a lot of injuries and he was playing a top six role. But overall, he's a bottom six forward, and he brings a bit of offense to a bottom six core that probably can use some offense. What bottom six can't use offense? So next, Mike Hoffman, obviously going to San Jose here. Just didn't really ever fit in Montreal. Was a pretty elite pointer. I'd say he was like a 60-point scorer back in his best days. But obviously, since he went to St. Louis and then to Montreal, those days kind of passed him. But now he gets another chance maybe to play in a top six where they're not going to be a good team in San Jose. But he's going to get a chance there. And I think it's good for Montreal because they get those two contracts off the books. More so Hoffman's because it wasn't really good at all, and there was a year left. But Montreal gets his contract off the books, free up some space. But we'll see the cap implications in a bit.
And I think it's also important to note that we talked about this a couple times, right? The Montreal Canadiens needed to free up that forward core a little bit, right? They needed to move a couple guys to free up some space for some young players to really thrive in this new look Montreal Canadiens team. And I think by moving Rem Pitlick and moving Mike Hoffman, you're now giving opportunities to some of the younger guys, to some of the guys that have something to prove and have something to show this season. And I think that that's really important for this young core in Montreal. Let's move on now and look at this from a team-to-team basis. Let's start it off with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into the Montreal Canadiens situation in a few minutes here. But I don't think we can ignore the elephant in the room that the Pittsburgh Penguins acquired Erik Karlsson, who just recently put up 100 points with the San Jose Sharks as a defenseman, won the Norris Trophy, and now is joining the Pittsburgh Penguins, I guess we'll say, older group in Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, and of course Jake Gensel, What do you see this team doing? Is there damage to be done? Is this a risky move by Kyle Dubas at the beginning of his tenure in Pittsburgh? Is this something that could, pan out and turn into a playoff team early in this window?
This team better make the playoffs. That's all I got to say. But this is a move that had to happen. Dubas doesn't have a huge window here. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him. I'd say it's about a 2-year window, maybe 3 if they're lucky. It's an aging group, but he adds the first 100-point defenseman in a long time. And their power play is going to be absolutely lethal with Gensel, Crosby, Malkin, Karlsson, and perhaps Letang if they're playing 2 defensemen. Their top 4 defense are looking really strong with Graves, Letang, Pettersson, and Erik Karlsson. And their top 6 is also looking pretty good with the moves Dubas made. So he had to make a big splash. He does it here, and they're going to be pushing for a spot. I wouldn't be surprised if they win the Metro, but I can also see them finishing in the wild card. It all depends on the health of the players, but we'll see how that pans out and see how this trade turns out in the next season.
Let me tell you something right now, and I'm going to come out here and really get my opinion out there. It looks like a good move. I think it has all the window dressing to look like a good move. But the truth is that, like you mentioned, we're looking at Sidney Crosby, who's 35 years old, still playing at an elite level, mind you, but we still have to take into consideration that he is 35 years old. Evgeny Malkin, 37 years old. Chris Letang, 36 years old. And now Erik Karlsson, 33 years old. Like you said, their window is now, but I think that their window is yesterday. I think that their window was yesterday, because if they don't make the playoffs, if they don't prove that this core group can play at an elite level right off the bat, this team is going to be in shambles for years to come. And again, I'm not praying on their downfall. I'm not hoping that they don't succeed. But all I'm saying is that it is a very risky move, considering that this team didn't make the playoffs last year, was bounced in by the Islanders 2 years in a row prior to last season. There's a lot to prove for this team, a lot on the table. They went all in. They pushed their chips all in. It's now or never. And I think that it's risky. I think that it could pan out, but it's going to take a lot in a very stacked Eastern Conference, in a very stacked Metropolitan Division, for the Pittsburgh Penguins to make their mark on this league.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. But I think the moves Dubas has made have made this team much stronger. I think last year was a bit of an off year, considering they had a lot of injuries, and there was some new guys in the lineup that just didn't do what they were supposed to do, like Jeff Petry, and having not a strong trade deadline, also leading them to not making the playoffs and having to get rid of some contracts that they don't necessarily need right now, like Mikael Granlund. But adding guys like Lars Eller, who has an experience with winning the Stanley Cup when he was on Washington, Nieto, veteran guy, and then Nola Chari, who's obviously brought a lot of grit, and then adding Rem Pitlick right now, providing some offense, and obviously along with Riley Smith, who just won a Stanley Cup. So, and
sorry to cut you off, but let's also not forget that they still do have Rickard Rakell and Brian Rust,
yep.
2 guys that, in my opinion, didn't play at an elite level last year, but definitely have the potential to play at an elite level.
Yeah.
And look, again, though, and I'm not taking anything away, and sorry to cut you off, but it's bothering me looking down their cap-friendly lineup and just seeing almost 3/4 of their players in their 30s. Rickard Rakell just turned 30, or sorry, he's 30. Brian Rust, 31 years old. Riley Smith, 32 years old. Jeff Carter, 38. Lars Eller, 34. Nola Chari, 31. Again, age doesn't necessarily matter if the core is good enough to compete. But the truth is that once this window, which we already can agree on is very, very small, expires, this team could be doomed.
Yeah, but that's just how it's going to be for certain teams. You have an aging core. This core has been very good for a really long time. They made the playoffs for I don't remember how many years straight, but a great amount of years straight, and that's just going to happen with an aging core. But Dubas is putting all his chips in right now, and their hopes are to win a Stanley Cup in the next year or two. That I'll give that to them as their window.
Let's move on now to the Montreal Canadiens situation, and that's obviously what we wanted to focus on here today. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things to dissect in this trade, but more specifically, let's talk about the Habs cap situation here. the Montreal Canadiens, without Carey Price on their books right now, or sorry, with him counting against the cap, without him counting against the cap, the Montreal Canadiens are $5 million over the cap. With him counting against the cap and with him on LTIR, the Montreal Canadiens will now improve their situation and be $5 million under the cap. It doesn't change the fact that the Montreal Canadiens still have a little bit of work to do, considering that they now acquired goalie Casey DeSmith at a very cheap price. But it speaks volume when you already have a guy like Primo, who there's a ton of question marks surrounding his name. Jake Allen, a couple question marks surrounding his name. Montembeault and his next opportunity with Montreal. So, Liam, did you want to speak a little bit about that goalie situation?
Yeah, let's touch base on that situation quickly. So with acquiring DeSmith, this is coming from Eric Engels, so this is basically what he's had to say about it. Acquiring DeSmith comes in as a security position of need, with Primo having to go through waivers if he doesn't make the Canadiens out of camp. So either way, the Canadiens are getting a flexible situation here, which means that they're able to trade Allen. I think he has some value, so they can maybe trade Allen down the line, especially if Primo is able to make the team. But if Primo does not make the team, they can run with 3 goalies and have a tandem of Montembeault, Allen, and DeSmith going in the future in the next season. So yeah, gaining DeSmith allows Montreal to have him as a security position in case Primo has to go through waivers and gets picked up by another team if he doesn't make camp. If he doesn't make the team out of camp.
And look, if the Montreal Canadiens want to move off of Jake Allen and get, whether it's a 2nd round pick, a 3rd round pick in return for a guy like him, at this point, it makes a lot of sense for Montreal. It does. And look, Jake Allen has provided a lot of stability to this Montreal Canadiens team, but this Montreal Canadiens team is heading in a completely different direction, which is going to obviously, like we mentioned, focus on a younger core. And don't get me wrong, Casey DeSmith isn't young by any means, but it's a question of one more year at $1.8 million. Correct me if I'm wrong, Liam. 1.8?
Yeah, 1.8.
$1.8 million, which is very cheap and doesn't really affect Montreal's cap situation going forward. Whereas Jake Allen still has a couple years left, and you could move him. You could move him right now to a contender and have him back up and again provide that stability to another team without him affecting Montreal's rotation. So I think that it makes a lot of sense, and it's a very harmless acquisition by Montreal to take on DeSmith.
Yeah, DeSmith has been pretty good in the past few seasons. He's a reliable backup goaltender. So, there really isn't too much risk. He doesn't have a big contract, and, we'll see how that turns out. Just to throw in quickly, with this trade, the Canadiens essentially gave up approximately $6 million in cap with Hoffman and Pitlick's contracts combined, but took back basically $6 million as well. So the cap really hasn't been affected too much. And we still have the same amount of cap space as before.
Yeah, so clearly it was not a lateral move, but a lateral economical move for the Montreal Canadiens. And that's okay, because even though it was lateral economically, they still freed up 2 forward spots. We'll call it 1.5 because Pitlick was up and down, but freed up at least 1 forward spot while adding Jeff Petry back onto this Montreal Canadiens team on the right side. Let's move on to that right now, because I think as interesting as this trade is for all teams involved, specifically the Pittsburgh Penguins, Jeff Petry back in Montreal is probably one of the funnier moments or funnier situations of all this. What do you think?
Yeah, so last season Petry came into Pittsburgh. I don't know if it was at the start of the season he said this, but there's an interview, just a little interview of him saying how in Pittsburgh, when he walked in, he felt like the standard was much higher than Montreal. And what do you know? Petry's back in Montreal. So, Justin, if you want to go over the potential moves that could happen with Petry and, some of the details with that, I'll let you go for it.
Yeah, well, what I find interesting about this trade is that, for one, Petry had a 15-team no-move clause. He waived his no-move clause to come play in Montreal. Now, maybe he's assuming that he doesn't actually ever get to touch the ice as a Montreal Canadien again and gets traded before the season even starts. That's something that Erik Engels mentioned, how it's a very large possibility that the Canadiens move off Petry before the season starts. But as of right now, he's a Montreal Canadien, and he's good enough to be in that top 6 as of right now, considering such a young core. Now, we talked at length about how important it is for these young players, whether it's Harris, Gouli, Jack-Eye, Barron, and I know respectively they're either a right or left D-man, but it's important for them to get in the lineup nonetheless. Now you're taking a spot away from them because Petry assumes a position right off the bat. But let's say the Habs were to go in a different direction and trade Jeff Petry. There's a lot of potential there to move off him at a retained salary, because the Montreal Canadiens right now are only retaining one contract, which is Joel Edmondson's when they traded him to the Washington Capitals. They're able to retain Jeff Petry at, for example, 50%, which would cost them about $2 million in cap space on an already retained 25% Petry contract. So that makes Petry a lot more of a desirable player to trade for a team that might be iffy on the right side, might be contending in the playoffs at the deadline, and needs that support and that stability and that leadership. So acquiring Petry, in my opinion, isn't a play for the Montreal Canadiens to solidify their decor. No. It's a play for the Montreal Canadiens to move off Jeff Petry to acquire assets in a trade where they actually traded away Petry to acquire Matheson and a pick, and now they got him back for essentially free. Yeah. So, in my opinion, that's a Kent Hughes massive W, a Went Hughes. I don't know how to say that, but absolutely great trade for the Montreal Canadiens, I think. And I think that I don't know if Petry will be traded sooner rather than later, but if I had to guess, and I'll stick with Erik Engels on this one, I think he'll be moved before the start of the NHL season.
Yeah, we can definitely assume that. I'm just really excited to wear my Jeff Petry shirt again. Except
you have a Jeff Petry shirt?
I can't wear it now because...
You have it?
No, I don't.
No, okay.
But that would be hilarious. Sell all your Jeff Petry merchandise right now while he's still on the Canadiens.
Can I say something, though? Speaking of that, I've realized that over the years, I've had the most random shirts. Like Briere.
That's really random.
So Briere, Drouin, that's not as random.
Is it number 92?
Number 92, yeah.
Tricolore Sport is selling all Jonathan Drouin number 92 jerseys, Adidas, the red one, $50.
50?
$50.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Jeff Petry cannot wear number 26 because Jonathan Kovacevic has taken it. So he should be picking out a new number right now. So I don't know. Any speculation? What number is he taking?
I think none, because he's not playing a game in the Montreal Canadiens uniform. And I truly believe that because, again, let's get back more on a serious note. If we think about it, this decor is already in a massive logjam. You want to give a guy like Barron minutes. Kovacevic deserves minutes for his season last year where he played above replacement level. There's no doubt about that. Then adding the fact that Gouli obviously has a secured spot. You want Jack-Eye in the lineup. You want Harris in the lineup. And then you have Mike Matheson. And you still have David Savard, who's under contract. And you're not going to really... We talked about... And look, it was funny because I don't know if you remember, but we talked about how Hoffman will be a day one scratch.
Yep.
Or at least I remember...
You said it.
Yeah, I said that. And look, I think Hughes obviously didn't want it to get to that point, so jumped into a three-way trade and moved him whenever it was possible, which might have actually foreshadowed him not being in the lineup to start day one. Now, I'm speculating, but you never know. But all that to say is that I don't think that they would ever scratch Savard in this case. And if they're not scratching Savard and they want all those other guys in the lineup, plus the addition of Petry, to me, it doesn't make very much sense for him to actually start the season.
Yeah, not at all. Just looking at the right defensemen on the Canadiens in their system right now, they got Savard, Petry, Kovacevic, Jack-Eye plays both sides, Barron, and obviously we got guys coming up. So
it doesn't make sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It just doesn't make sense.
After going out and drafting Reinbacher, drafting Lane Hudson, Adam Engstrom is somewhere in the pipeline. Like it's just clearly a move.
Mm-hmm. If we're able to get assets out of this, because I do think Jeff Petry still has value, and considering that contract of like $2.6 million, if we retain 25%, then
that would be if we retain
50%. Yeah. Then we can definitely get some assets out of it. So I don't know what the plan is here. If the Canadiens are looking to push for a playoff spot, we know Habs Fan TV had an opinion about that one. So I don't know. Looking at it just doesn't make much sense to me since there's quite the log jam. But hopefully we can get some assets out of it.
So now with this updated lineup, what do you see the lines looking like? Like what's the biggest differences for you? Who's moving up? Who's not getting time at all, especially on that decor? If Petry, let's just assume a Petry were to start the season as a Hab.
Yeah.
What are the changes you're making?
I'll start from the defenseman end because Petry was, I guess, the most significant piece that we acquired. So I'm still gonna have Matheson, Savard, Gooley as your top 3D. And then I guess you just got to slot in Petry there since he does bring some offensive and defensive upside, I guess. I don't know his exact numbers, but you just got to play him. And then I got Harris and Jack-Eye. So Kovacevic is taking a seat as well as Weidman, who doesn't come in the lineup too often. And Barron's going to be in the minors, I guess. So that's just unfortunate. And yeah, go for it.
No, I just don't. I'm not saying that I disagree with you because I think right off the bat, that's obviously, and I agree with that's how the lines would look if Petry were there. It's just the more I think about it, the more I can't take away the fact that I really just don't think that there's a world where Justin Barron doesn't start in the NHL because he took strides.
For sure. At the end of the season, he was looking really good. So,
but anyway, we'll see. And I guess for right now, we have to slot him in out of respect, right?
Yeah, definitely. And then on the forward core, I'm still going to have Caulfield, Suzuki, and I think last time I honestly put, I think it was Anderson on the first line or Hoffman. I can't remember. But now with Hoffman gone, I think Slavkovsky is going to make that jump to the second line. They're going to play him a lot. And Newhook continues to play in the top 6 like I had. So essentially your top 6 is Caulfield, Suzuki, Dak, Newhook, Slavkovsky, and Anderson, not in any specific order.
Mm-hmm.
And then in your bottom 6, you got Gallagher, Monahan, Harvey Pinard, Jake Evans, Armia, and Dvorak in no specific order again.
Right. Yeah, I can agree with that. And I think there's no doubt that, again, Hughes's vision is to get some of these younger guys a little bit more playing time. So that means that Slavkovsky's going to assume a bigger role. And look, we've seen some training videos, and I don't want to jinx anything, and I don't want to jump on the, I guess we'll call it the bandwagon too soon, but he's looking like he's in better shape. He looks a lot quicker in some of the videos. He looks like his skating has improved significantly, and maybe that has to do with weight and size. But again, if Kent Hughes is banking on his former first overall pick to take strides, then there was no reason not to free up that space in that forward core.
Yeah, they've got to give him a shot here. Those videos made him look absolutely amazing. His skating looked phenomenal. And his hands look phenomenal.
And he's absolutely as raw as it gets, right? He's as raw of a first-round pick as we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, I'd say. Like he didn't come polished.
No, not at all.
So let's see what he can do there. I think, like you said, I agree with you on the Newhook thing. I think he's going to assume some top 6 minutes. I think the one difference I'd make, and maybe this is because I'm seeing it a lot on Twitter, but I like the idea of Monahan on the wing, especially with Caulfield and Suzuki. I think he really stabilizes that line in different ways. So that could be interesting. Now, what does that mean for Anderson? Who knows? Maybe that it's more of a middle 6 for Anderson now. But nonetheless, I think that this was a really good move, not only to acquire a guy like Petry who you can easily flip, but to also free up some spaces for these young guys.
And getting a second-round pick out of it.
Yeah, let's not ignore the fact that there's a lot of talent in the second round. We've seen that in back-to-back years, whether it was with Lane Hudson or whether it was with a guy like, I'm blanking on his name, with Andrew Cristal in the second round, drafted by Washington. There was obviously more gems there, but that's just giving an example.
And then finally, to finish off the lineup here, what's your goalie, not the tandem, but the order?
Montembeault first for sure.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there.
And look, I think this really hints at moving off Jake Allen. I don't know if that's before the season starts or if that's at the deadline. And I don't know how I feel about a 3-man rotation in the NHL. But I think it makes more sense for DeSmith to be the number 2 and for the Montreal Canadiens to really push to move Jake Allen and acquire some assets because the difference in value, or not value, but the difference in quality from Allen to DeSmith isn't significant enough for a backup goalie.
Yes.
In my opinion.
No, I agree with that.
Especially if they're willing to roll with Montembeault.
100%. I just think Jake Allen is obviously a vet here, and he's giving it his all every game. You can see he gets frustrated when he's having a tough game.
Yeah, because he's getting 40 shots a game.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous.
And I do think he's still a terrific backup goalie, and just the Canadiens have no use for him right now. We don't want a veteran goalie to play starter minutes when he's really a backup. So might as well move him now that he has the value, move him to a contending team, and then we can go along with Montembeault and DeSmith and see what happens with Primo.
And let's not forget, Liam, that he has this coming season at 3.850, plus the season after that one. And because we already talked about the Montreal Canadiens being able to retain another two spots on top of the Edmonton one, they wanted to move Petry and Jake Allen and retain salary. There's no reason why they wouldn't, especially considering with price on LTIR, they have the amount of money to do so.
Yeah.
So I think all signs are pointing towards those two moves being made. It's a question of when and not. It's a question of when it will happen. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I still think that there's a good chunk of summer left until October rolls around for the start of the season. So let's see what Kent Hughes and his brass can do.
Yeah. And then again, we'll free up another about $5 million if we're able to move Petry and Allen. So who knows what can happen, who we can sign in the future.
And what moves the Montreal Canadiens can make to improve their roster going into the 2023-2024 season.
Yep.
Anyway, guys, we stuck to our word. We kept it short and sweet. Hopefully we informed you guys. Hopefully it was a fun episode. We thank you guys so much for tuning in. And until next time, guys, thank you.
Thanks, guys.